Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay. Now the Berlin Marathon on Sunday, there's quite a few YouTubers running. There seems to be two ambitions in the race. One, to actually get the fastest time possible, and secondly, to go to as many Adidas shakeout runs as possible before the race and to get those Pro 4s on their feet. But it will be interesting to see how they do. We've got Nick Bester at the sub-elite level going for a sub-220 all the way down to Aubrey, who I think will be lucky to break 5 hours in his debut, but good luck to all the runners. So the runners I'll be featuring are in fact Nick and Aubrey, but also I thought I'd look at Chris Ford, BenParkes and Donato, who's been asking me to do him for a while. So let's have a look at those 5 and also do a quick summary of all the other prominent YouTubers that I've spotted there already. Okay, so this is Nick Bester's spreadsheet. I've done a slightly different way of doing it this time, largely because I've run a bit short of time. So I've just looked at, as usual, the 14 weeks of the marathon block. I've kind of ignored the fact what actually each athlete has done just for standardization. I think in Nick's case, he actually did a 10-week block starting from the 22nd of July there for week 5 in my thing. And also ignore the last week in terms of like for the totals and the averages, because I always think it's a taper, and most of the time obviously the taper week is still ongoing. Obviously the race is on Sunday and I'm recording this on Friday. So it's a very good training block again by Nick Bester. He's averaging there 86 miles in the block, and he didn't actually start his real marathon training until that 5th week in the block there, as you can see. And his pace is a very consistent average pace, sort of around about the 6:30 minutes per mile. Apologies, I didn't put it into kilometers per hour, but I'm sure if you know 6:30 pace, that's well under 3-hour pace, isn't it? And of course, Nick's trying to finally break the 2-hour 20 barrier. His PB is actually 2:20 and 8 seconds from Berlin 2 years ago. So I think he's certainly on the fastest course in the world. Now, I think this time his build-up races haven't been quite so good, but he's also been rather focusing on quite short distance races like 5Ks. So done quite a lot of them, I thought. And his only sort of one longer race there was the big half on the 10th week there, 26th of August. And I think also what was noticeable that he hadn't done many long runs. The only long run he'd done is these customary sort of 3x10k, slower than marathon pace, at marathon pace, and a bit faster than marathon pace. Now his 2:20 marathon pace would be 33:10 for 10k, and he seemed to nail that session very well. But I would say that he's done a lot of volume this time, but it all seems to be crammed in. It all seems to be rather forced to me, and there's an awful lot of sort of sessions in there. Almost is to the point like he's training for 5k and 10k, but wants to run a marathon. So I wish him best of luck, but I just sort of fear that maybe he's just sort of overcooking this a bit. Maybe he's almost training a bit too hard. It was always sort of the boom shakalaka and all that sort of stuff. I do wonder sometimes whether he might be better just to sort of like chill out a bit. And is there almost an element of having too much focus at one time? I think when you sort of go into a marathon block and you sort of like rush out the 10 weeks of it, yeah, obviously he's coming from a very strong background, but I just sort of do worry that this is all emphasis a bit too much on quality and not enough distance, with especially only one run be longer than 21 miles, which for someone of his ability, I do wonder if that's sort of really enough. But having said that, he has had 4 weeks there in the middle, or even 5 weeks actually, where he's like 90 to 100 miles, 160k in new money. So yeah, there's certainly like every will in the world there, and he did a total of 1,020 miles in this block, which I look at my previous summary sheet for Berlin, it was almost identical. He did 1143 in that Berlin PB block. But I think what was telling in that block, he did a half marathon in 66 minutes at Cambridge before the race, whereas this year he's only done 69 minutes. So yeah, but his 5Ks have been very good. He's well under 15 minutes. But obviously a good 5k and a marathon is something else. So it'd be very interesting to see how he does. Will he race in the Evo 1s or the Pro 4s? That could be a factor. And that's probably, you would say that either of those two shoes would be faster than the ones he's used before, i.e. the Pro 3s or the Pro 2s. So yeah, best of luck to him. Now for complete contrast, we've got Aubrey, who's doing his first ever marathon. So it's a bit hard to see how he would go, but what you would instantly notice is how much less sort of training volume he does. He's done a total of 275 miles in this block, averaging just a mere 21 miles a week. Now, you might think that's not very much for a marathon, but I think you would have to say that Aubrey's first aim here is to get round. And looking at some of these times, he did a 2:12 half marathon in Berlin, and he also did a 2:12 half marathon as part of a 3-hour 20 longer run. So the longest run he's done is actually quite an impressive 3 hours 53 for 22 miles, which I think is another factor here that compared to Nick, Aubrey's almost in contrast running an ultra because he's basically going to be running for twice as long, if not longer. So his long run is 3 hours 53, whereas Nick's long run was barely sort of little more than just over 2 hours. So it's quite a different kettle of fish for a start. And you can see here, all of Aubrey's paces, average paces per week, have always been sort of winning himself. He's done an awful lot of level 2 running according to his Strava. So I think for him, that means he's probably not going too much faster than a fast walk. So I think it's been a bit frustrating for him. And I think he, from a training point of view, wanted to crack on. I did notice that he also in the past had done a lot of strength and conditioning, and he did it for the first 2 weeks of the block. Well, the 14 weeks block. I'm not sure whether he actually really started, actually. But he soon gave that up, actually, and just sort of concentrated on the running. His average sort of runs per week is about 3 or 4 there, isn't it? So, yeah, consistent training, and which is very good. But obviously, you would expect that if you're going to run a marathon, you would probably think you're going to run a bit more than this. But I think there's also an element that he's a very new runner, and he's also perhaps a bit, without being polite, he's not the sort of the most sort of slimmest of runners. So there's also an element there that he's got to sort of get the trip, as it were. So I think it's been a good training block, and of course he's been wearing all sorts of shoes. So he's becoming the top influencer in the running space, and you can see he's getting invited to all these things. And yeah, he's well in with Believe in the Run, and then maybe this time he got in there before Chris Ford, Fordy Runz. Speaking of which, let's come on to him. Now, he's had a bit of a struggle, I think, in the last few weeks. He was injured coming out of London Marathon, then he had about 6 weeks off with a badly damaged ankle, which I can only emphasise with because I haven't had most of the summer off myself and only getting back into it. I can hardly really speak too much there. But what I do notice with Chris is that he doesn't really ever run what I would say hard in terms of like what I call hard. He does an awful lot of like runs where he does goal pace within long runs, but I think what he means there is goal pace in terms of marathon. I don't think I've seen him done a 5k 10k pace work, and he hasn't really been doing any fast park runs or fast 10ks. He's been racing the odd 10k, but it's all been about sort of high 40s. So I think he seems a bit frustrated, but also I'm kind of thinking that there's an element of what you put in is what you get out. And you can see here that you average in this block just 33 miles, so not that many more than Aubrey. So his PB was last year in London, 340. I don't think he's got any hope of beating that, but I think, I'm sure he'll have a good day out, as he always does, and looking forward to the video, and hopefully there'll be a few other 40s for him to run with. But yeah, I think if he's serious about improving his running, I would have to say that he would need to sort of actually put a bit more quality in there. I think he's a bit new seamless, because I think there's dangers that we've been running a few years, then you kind of get stuck and you have to sort of like come up with different ways. Just doing the same old thing each time is tricky. I mean, having said that, he has done a lot of good runs, and he's done there, I can see 3 or 4 sort of around 20 miles. In fact, like there's actually 5 there, isn't it? And I think some of those runs, the actual paces have been quite close to his PB pace. So he did a 20-mile run there at 8:31 pace, whereas his PB is only 8:25. So maybe he's fitter than he actually makes out, but yeah, I just don't think he's been really showing it in any terms of racing this time. But yeah, good luck to him. Now, a complete contrast, Donato is a M60 runner, one of the best in the country for his age group, often makes the England Athletics age group teams. Now, I hadn't really ever looked at his training too much, and I always struck with him that he doesn't do too much quality, but he does sort of do an amazing amount of actual training time. And what I hadn't really realised that some of these overall times here, I mean, he's literally training for a day a week. I mean, literally. So, if you didn't go to sleep, he's actually got 24 hours of training in a week on average. But what he does is an awful lot of walking, and he does quite a lot of yoga, bit of biking I see as well. He's actually been outside on his bike for a few rides. So the actual amount of running volume is actually quite difficult to tell on Strava, because Strava just bundles it all together, and I didn't really have time to literally go through every activity and count them all up. But I did actually notice sort of his longest runs here. His longest run in the block is only a 20-mile run at 8:07 pace. So I think it's going to be an interesting stretch to see how you go from that sort of time on feet type run to try to run a sub 7 minute pace. His PB actually is 3:2:38 from Manchester I think, the year before, and I think he was literally a second slower in Manchester this year. So he's certainly capable of running a sub-3, and I think some of his shorter times, I think he's done a 37-minute 10K in the last couple of years, have been, I would argue, more impressive. So not sure that he's got quite the form here to run a sub-3 marathon, but he's got this amazing ability, I think, to go from doing not a lot of quality to be able to push it out on the day. I think that's perhaps a good example there of somebody who's an older runner who's found the best way to get the most out of himself. But I just sort of wonder whether he's quite got enough marathon training in the books here. So I'm interested to see how he goes, and indeed if he's actually going to go all out for a sub-3, or whether he's just going to take it a bit more easy. He has been doing a lot of pacing recently. I noticed he paced 2 half marathons, including the Great North Run, and I think one where Paula Radcliffe was involved at Worcester. So that will be interesting to see whether he can actually convert that sort of sub-maximal training into something stellar on the day. And the last one I'm going to look in detail is BenParkes. Now, Ben has been sort of struggling in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, coming off a very bad accident when he fell off his skateboard, I think, and broke his ankle. And he hasn't really ever recovered that form. He did do a 2:38, having said that, in Valencia last year, but that's way slower than the 2:25, his PB in 2018. So I think when I look at his training, he doesn't seem that this Berlin Marathon will be a full-on effort. Having said that, though, he has been sort of doing not a huge amount of mileage, but quite a lot of long runs. So he's got quite a few long runs there of the 20 to 22 mark. And he's one of those athletes that he seems to do an awful lot of running exactly about 7-minute mile pace, which to me just seems a bit quick for the level he's at. I mean, his marathon pace there for a 2:38 is 6:04. So you could argue that 7-minute pace is only a minute slower. But I don't think he's really in that sort of 6:04, 2:38 shape. But I've noticed that he does most of his training runs at that pace. And the only time he ever goes slower than that, if he goes up a mountain run. And even if he's like ill, he'll come back and run a 10K. He's ill there. He still run a 7:19 for 6 miles. So I do wonder sometimes whether perhaps he ought to slow down a bit more. I think, having said that, he does live in London, on a very flat area of London. So I think perhaps there's also an element, if you're running along the side of the river, because it's very flat, it's easy to sort of get going, and he doesn't perhaps run as much hills as some of the people do, apart from when he goes on holiday and stuff like that. So yeah, I suspect that Ben won't be on full out gas here. He did an 82-minute half marathon though the other week, which he billed as a training run. So off the back of that, based on what I did, that's probably it's probably 250 to 255 form. I guess it depends on how much he's going to try. I would imagine that he's probably looking to Valencia again, which seems to be his favourite race. But yeah, so I think this will be a stepping stone run for him. Now, I had a look at a few others that I'd seen out there. Ben Felton, Phily Bowden, Ben Johnson, the Believe in the Run crew, Megan, Thomas, Robbie, Matt Bertram. It's Matt Bertram. Kofuzi's out there. Not quite sure if he's running. Drew Whitcomb from the Rare Testers. And Tommie Runz. We don't really know too much about it. He all seems to pop up at these things. So I did a bit of a trawl through their Strava and also found their marathon PB. So here they all are. And I might fall on my sword here, but I did a bit of a guess of how they would run. I don't think Ben Felton's in PB shape. He's had a few injury problems, and I think he's probably going to be around about the 2:30-ish mark. But you never know with him. He's a very good athlete, but I just don't think he's got enough work in the bag. Phily Bowden would be interesting. It's a bit hard for her to judge because although she does a lot of YouTube videos, and I think she's been doing a few 100-mile weeks recently, she doesn't put all those training on Strava, so you can't really examine it to the detail. That's why I kind of left it off. But I'm kind of thinking that Berlin's probably the fastest course that she's ran. I think she's done Houston with a PB there, and I think she was just a fractionally faster than she was in Copenhagen. So I think this will probably be the best opportunity she's had so far. And yeah, it's interesting to see how she could do. I mean, she could easily do a lot better than 2:28, but I've been a bit conservative there. 1 minute PB for a pro athlete is always a big ask for sure. Ben Johnson's out there. Now, he's a very prolific marathon runner. And sometimes he seems to run quite hard. Sometimes he takes it easy. I would imagine this time he's probably going to give it a reasonable go, but he sometimes doesn't always quite go full out. So I've guessed 2:40. I've heard Megan on Believe in the Run being a bit unsure about her fitness, but I think she's the sort of athlete who probably will give it a go. So I've said 247, and I'm interested to see what shoes she wears, because I think obviously this time she's got to wear one of the Adidas shoes, and she's obviously normally an Alphafly favourite. Tommie runs. He's a lot faster actually than I realised. He'd done a 2:48 marathon in 21, and looking at some of his training, he's sort of making out that marathon pace. He's sort of heading down towards 6-minute miles, but he didn't seem to be sort of too confident on some of his comments. So I put him down for a 2:56. Matt Bertrand, again, another one that I didn't quite was as fast as he did. I found a 2:51 for him back in 2010, but I don't think he's anywhere near that shape anymore. So I think for him, around about 3:15. I do wonder whether some of these guys, there's so many shakeout runs and events that they're going that will they be exhausted. I think that happened to Kofuzi on one of the recent marathons. And I'm not entirely sure whether he's actually racing this one. I've seen him there, so he's clearly going to be doing some sort of video, but whether he's actually running, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't actually heard. Drew Whitcomb is a channel of the wear testers I've only occasionally watched, but again, another athlete that I thought was a bit better than I thought he was actually. So he's got a 3:16 PB from London last year. So I guess he's probably running about that time again. I really don't know anything about his training. And I think Thomas and Robbie from Believe in the Run, their PBs are now quite old when they were 3:24 and 3:27. I think Thomas may have had a few injury problems of late, so I think I'm expecting to see those two around about the 4-hour mark, maybe Thomas a bit over, maybe Robbie a bit under, but it just depends on whether they're going to be trying all out or not. I suspect they're probably just interested in getting around as best as they can. And also interesting to look at the 4-week mileages on Strava. As they review so many shoes, that I thought their mileages were a bit more than they actually are, but it says they're 31 miles last 4 weeks for Thomas and 37 for Robbie. I mean, that's more than I'm doing at the moment, so I shouldn't really be sounding off too much. But yeah, Megan is a very serious athlete there, 68 miles in the last 4 weeks, and that probably includes some downtime due to the taper and stuff. Ben Johnson, very prolific runner there, 72 miles last 4 weeks, and again, probably his average is higher. Ben Felton, I'm surprised to see only 34. So again, that sort of illustrates what I'm saying, that he might not be in the best form. And maybe on that, 2:32 maybe even a struggle. I think maybe for him, it would get round in one piece might be the order of the day. And Phily Bowden said, according to Strava, she's only averaging about 50 miles a week, but she's definitely done the videos where she's talking more around about 100 miles. So I'm not quite sure with athletes like that, which runs they decide to hide and which they don't, because they put sessions on there, they put some runs on there. Maybe it's just like they've got it automatically set to private and they just randomly select ones to put on. I mean, I just leave them all on there and it is what it is. Anyway, so what do you think of all this? What do you think of all these Adidas shoes as well? We've got the Evo SL, isn't it, which seems to be an upmarket version of the SL2, a plateless version of the Evo 1, and we've got the Adios Pro 4 coming soon. I thought it was a bit of a joke that they actually say coming soon. Normally with Nike say it'll be coming soon, but you expect it within the week. With Adidas, it seems to be coming soon on the 1st of January. I thought there was rumours of a limited drop, but maybe that's only for the people out in Berlin. It doesn't seem that there'll be any sort of drops from the resellers or Adidas, but there may be, who knows. But yeah, is that a shoe that's interesting you? It does seem to have lost a bit of weight. I always found the Pro 3 a decent sort of super trainer for me, but never really felt much of an urge to race in it. I did do a few good sessions in it, but I think I just do prefer the sort of the feel of the Nike ones. But yeah, I'd say definitely Adidas and Saucony are my sort of second and third brands behind Nike. Some shoes I like more than others. So, hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe and see you next one then. Bye.